Hi everybody, Professor Snart here, checking in as we get closer and closer to our first full-blown essay, which will occur here in this combined Unit 7 and 8. So we've just finished up Unit 5, or just finishing up Unit 5 as I'm recording this on February 9th, Tuesday, Feb 9. And then we turn around and, like I said, kind of fit the last puzzle piece in before we bring them all together into that our first essay. So Unit 6 is really a fairly simple one, I'm not going to lie, and probably won't take you that long. But for our purposes, it's really, really important. One of the most crucial things to understand as far as successfully completing English 1102, which is sometimes called the research course. It's the comp course that has the research component. So that's what Unit 6 is doing for us. It's providing that kind of a research piece to that larger puzzle that we're putting together. So it's really fairly simple and, like I said, fairly straightforward. It's not that demanding, but it's really, really important that you have a clear idea about what we're trying to do here, and also how this, again, fits into that larger kind of research or essay writing picture. Okay, so you'll notice that we are not quite at midterm, although we're getting close, at least for our 8-week term. So there's a little survey here. It's ungraded, anonymous, just kind of asking about your experience so far. Hopefully things have been going fairly well. The due dates are clear. The unit assignments are clear. Feedback's been timely. You can just let me know. But again, anonymous, ungraded, so it'll take you maybe 5-10 minutes at the most. All right, so again, our objective here is to look at what are sometimes called secondary sources or critical sources, even though they're not negative necessarily. That's why it's a bit of a misleading term. So there's a couple of more stories to read from our textbook. Again, potential ones that you might write about for your essay. So it's really important to read those, even though there's no like quiz or anything attached to them directly necessarily in this unit. But you want to have a series of choices to choose from when we do get to the next unit when you're writing your essay. So you might write about boys and girls, you might write about one of these stories, but it's good to have a choice. Sometimes you just have better ideas, or you're just more interested in one story versus another. Okay, so our discussion board assignment here, there's actually probably more text in the assignment than you might produce in your post for it. But that's kind of, it again speaks to how important this is. So you're going to be finding what we're going to call a secondary source, again sometimes called a critical source, but that's a little misleading since they can be very positive and sometimes even just sort of neutral in terms of talking about important themes in a work or characters or stuff like that. So for us, a secondary source is going to be a very particular type. And this isn't to say that in other writing situations or research situations you might use different kind of sources, but for our purposes, this is what we're going to use. And again, it's fairly simple. It's kind of a black and white thing, but it has a really, really profound impact on your grade if in our major formal essay assignments you're not getting this basic stuff right. Again, it's so fundamental to English 1102 as the research course or the research part of it that it really figures heavily into your grade. That's why we devote this one unit to basically just this and looking at, this very, very kind of limited type of thing here. Okay, so we are going to use sources for our purposes that are appropriate and relevant. And so for us, that's going to mean appropriate means that they come from a database and a COD database. And these you can access through the library. We looked at this a little bit in the previous unit as a way just of making sure that everyone has a library card, which is how you access the databases if you're not on campus. So because there's something that we pay for, that COD pays for, like a subscription, there needs to be a mechanism to make sure that you are basically a paying customer. And so having a working library card is the way that happens. Okay, so that's the appropriate part. We're just using material from the COD database. So you can't Google stuff, you can't just use Wikipedia. And again, it's not to say that those aren't, in some situations, really great research resources, but that's not the kind of source that we're using for our purposes. So that's the appropriate part. They just come from a COD database. The relevant part is the other piece of that, and relevant for us means that a secondary source, a critical source, a research source that you're finding for this assignment and for our essays are direct discussions or commentaries on whatever the primary text you're talking about is. So if you were writing your essay on, let's say, the short story called Araby by James Joyce, one of the assignments for this unit, then the secondary source you find would have to be from a database and a direct discussion of that particular short story. Not just a big biographical thing about Joyce, or since this story is about, like a number that we've read, sort of like child psychology or child development or the maturing process, you can't just find something from like a psych journal or your textbook that would talk about the general idea of maturity and development and stuff like that. It's kind of tangentially related, I get that, but it's not a direct discussion of that particular short story. And that's what we're looking for. So when you write an essay, we're looking for you to develop a thesis, talk about that primary text, but also to introduce and manage other voices who've also talked about that text as well, not just about some like kind of tangentially related idea. Notice how this goes back as a conceptual thing to that stick figure. So the idea of the shape of an essay, shape of a paragraph, once we've laid out a topic, kind of the broadest part, and a thesis for our essay, that's those arms narrowing down. Once we move through the body of our essay or the body of the stick figure, we're not getting outside of a discussion of whatever that primary text is or our thesis about that text. So notice again that something just sort of from a barely related source, even if it's from a database, it might be appropriate, it's from an appropriate source, but it's not relevant for our discussion. It needs to be a direct discussion of whatever the primary text or texts that you're talking about are in your particular essay. So for this discussion board, we're again totally decontextualizing this and just having you find a database source and then kind of report on it. So obviously you're choosing something that's a source for one of the stories we've read, including these two that we're going to read for this unit. You're telling us what the title of the source is, and sometimes they're really lame. Sometimes they're just like the same title as the short story, so they often don't get very creative. But notice that it does usually have a title. We want to know the database that it came from, and again, there's a couple that I list here that are good. You can see that there's tons within the literature category of databases on the COD Library website. You can check any or all of those if you want. You're not locked into just the ones I'm suggesting, but these are some that I know will deliver the kinds of results that we're looking for. So the database, again, is the database. You'll often see other names attached or other labels attached, titles attached to this. Those are usually like parent companies that will own multiple databases. So Gale, Thomson Research, I don't know what some of the other ones are, but those are the big parent companies. So we rarely, if ever, have to refer to them. We're interested in the specific database that we're drawing information from. Okay, so the name of the author, these are usually named when you find a database source, but sometimes not, honestly. I mean, even though someone obviously like actually wrote it, sometimes the way that databases are compiled they just don't acknowledge authorship. But obviously look for this, and of course it's important to do for our unit here, but once you're writing an actual essay, if you're going to pull a quotation from the secondary source, it's really ideal to know what that author name is, so you can introduce the quotation effectively by saying, like, in her article on James Joyce's Araby, Jane Smith notes that, and then provide the quotation. Provides a nice like introduction. It integrates the quote nice and seamlessly. But obviously it's important for you to be able to know what that author name is so you can do that effectively. Many database items will have an original place of publication, like a print journal or print book. That's useful to know as well, so we're going to see if we can find that information. And then you're going to give us a really basic one-paragraph, fairly well-developed summary of the article. But this isn't your subjective opinion of it necessarily. This is really just giving us a sense of, does it present a specific argument, or is it more like an overview? Does it discuss plot, character setting, all of those things? Does it have a sort of focus in that way? So this really isn't like you agree with it, you disagree. You're just kind of giving us the basic facts here. Although once you've done this, certainly you can suggest if there's a way in which maybe the material in the database has pointed something out that you hadn't noticed before. I mean, that's kind of the point of them, is to help us see things in works that we didn't notice before. So they bolster our own thesis that we're putting forward, but they also introduce us to new ideas that we can then work into essays that we're writing. So again, like you'll discover, this is fairly straightforward stuff and probably won't take you a ton of time, I get that, but is really, really crucial to get right so that you can do it effectively in our major essays, and that, again, is really where the bulk of the points for our course is coming, all right? There's also a little piece on integrating sources effectively, like I just mentioned. So there's lots of ways of doing it, but like I've said before, we always want to integrate a quote smoothly. So whether we introduce it with a little phrase, like the example I gave before, or something, we never want to have a quote that's just its own sentence. It's way too abrupt. There's no context. We don't know who's speaking. We don't know who's writing this. Any of that kind of stuff. So that really doesn't work very well. So there's a little review of that here. And that's pretty much it. So a fairly simple assignment, but one that's really, really crucial to understand and to get right. Also note that there's a reply part to this discussion board. But since a lot of what people are reporting on is just sort of factual stuff, your reply might be something like, I found a similar source, or I did the same story but found a different source. So you can kind of elaborate a little bit rather than just trying to reply to what is, for the most part, just objective factual information. All right, so as always, be in touch if you have questions or concerns. Keep checking those due dates so you know what's right around the corner, but also noticing that our first essay is coming up after Unit 6 is complete, and then sort of keeping your eye on how we go as we get, honestly, towards the end of our course. I know it probably doesn't feel like it right now, but once we pass that first essay mark, we get right into our last one and spend the last few units that we've got, the last weeks of our 8-week term, just working on that one major kind of writing piece. All right? Again, questions, concerns, be in touch, and I will talk with everybody soon.